warm welcome to Red Ice Creations Radio. My name is Henrik Palmgren. I'm the editor and webmaster of redicecreations.com, and this is our internet talk radio show recorded from the west coast of Sweden. You can join us every Thursday and Sunday for our regular program, and don't miss out on our subscriber section if you want to have full access to our growing archive of radio interviews. Today we have Tom Horn back with us on the show. Tom was first with us almost exactly a year ago, so this is a very good time to have Tom back. He is, of course, behind the website RaidersNewsNetwork.com. He's the author to The Arman Gate, and he's been a guest on numerous talk radio shows around the States and also around the web. And today we're going to spend some time talking with Tom about his new and upcoming book, Nephilim Stargates, the year 2012, and the Return of the Watchers. Pretty intriguing title, to say the least. This is going to be fascinating. I'm really excited about today's program. So let's say welcome back to the program, Mr. Horn. It's nice to have you on the show again, and thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Henrik. And I was thinking before we came on the show that it had been about an hour, so about a year since I had been on, so I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
You know, as you get older, you wonder if your memory is as accurate as it ought to be. So
yeah, that's right. How about the time speed? As I've been having, the experience, the time, the sense of that the time is going faster and faster, and many people always attribute that to age, I guess. But have you experienced that, by the way?
Look, I can, and when I look in the mirror in the morning, I can see it in the loss of my hair. So I know it's happening.
Yeah,
there's no way to stop it, brother. So we just do. We just got to hang on. By the way, let me give you kudos for your website. One of the things I always appreciate about Red Ice is the artwork and some of the other stuff that you guys do there is just absolutely world class. I love it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's our angle, I guess, to it a bit. I mean, there's a lot of info out there, as it were, and we try to just squeeze in the good bits and try to spice that up a lot with the artwork. So thank you for that one. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I follow along, RaidersNewsNetwork.com. Excellent website, and also appreciate very much the stories, very similar interests, and you, of course, were one of the first to open up my eyes to this particular topic that we, of course, will be talking about here today, on the Nephilim and the Watchers, and most certainly the technological aspect to it. But just thinking about this, Tom, before we kick things off and dive into talking about your new book, we might have some new people with us who might be unfamiliar with you and your work, so it might be a good idea to maybe if you could tell us a little bit about yourself before that.
Well, just very quickly, my wife and I, Anita and I, we've been involved in a lot of different things over the years. I don't know that I should go back and rehash all of that, but most recently, in the last couple of years, her and I co-authored a book called The Arman Gate. That was a book that that was the first interview that you did with me.
Yeah.
I was on that book, and you and I got into a lengthy conversation at that time, I think, about genetically modified crops.
Yeah.
And talking about transgenics and things like that. I'm happy to say that in the last year, of course, we've had more time for writing and speaking on things that interest us. And I'm going to be speaking at the Roswell Convention here in the United States here in another few weeks, and I've got to get ready for that. So we're doing all that. The other thing we've started doing is that we're publishing other authors now. We launched a publishing house here in the U.S. about, maybe 2 years ago, but we haven't been pushing it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we've got Patty Heron wanting us to publish his new book, Apocalypse Soon. We just published Lynn Marzulli's new book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually just signed a contract with George Archibald, the former lead investigator for the Washington Times.
Oh.
And when this top secret book comes out in January, just before the primaries here in the U.S., people are going to know why Archibald was nominated for the Pulitzer 5 times, because I predict that this book's going to significantly affect the national election here in the United States.
Oh, really?
So that's part of what we're doing now that's of great interest. And of course, like you say, every day we've got Raiders News Network. We're always trying to find reputable news stories, things that we believe to be legitimate news stories, but cutting-edge, edgy stuff.
Yeah.
And we leave all the other blasé news to all the other news agencies, kind of like red ice. You know, we go for the throat. We look for the stuff that seems to be kind of on the edge and that nobody else might be covering, but that has some credibility.
Definitely.
So now, of course, the most recent foray of mine into writing is this book, Nephilim Stargates, the year 2012, and the Return of the Watchers, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
This is a book, Henrik, that is actually a hard look at the real science and the real history behind the fiction, behind the novel that my wife and I wrote, The Ahriman Gate. This book actually looks at much of the research that we were doing that led to the writing of that novel, and I just felt that this information could not be, it couldn't just be put into a locker, that these were things that needed to be discussed, because these are real advancing sciences, and there's a great deal of history behind what some of this science may have done in ancient history and might be doing today.
Definitely. Also, I understand that your interest in this subject dates back to your childhood and a discovery made by your dad. Isn't that so?
Yeah, that's a different story altogether. You know, when I was a child, my dad was a police officer, and one day when he was deer hunting, he loved to deer hunt up in the mountains here in Arizona. He came across these large holes in the ground. He'd never seen them before. And, you know, Dad was very familiar with the Arizona desert. He had grown up riding fence line for the Bard Ranch, which was the largest open-range territory ranch in the state of Arizona at the time, tens of thousands of acres. Very familiar with all this land. And as a police officer, of course, he was also familiar with this land. He knew all the local native Indians, people living in that area. And he's up hunting in an area he's very familiar with, and he comes around this corner on the part of this mountain, and all of a sudden here are these very large holes in the ground. He had never seen them before. Now, Henrik, these things were probably 20 feet across and maybe 8 feet deep, and they had essentially appeared overnight.
Okay.
They were filled with rainwater, and the deer were coming down trying to drink the water out of these large holes, and they were slipping off into these holes, and then they couldn't get out, and they were drowning. And Dad took pictures of these holes, came home, showed me and my family pictures of the holes. I still have copies of these pictures. If anybody wants to see them, they can email me at raidersnewsupdate@gmail.com. I'll be happy to show them copies of these pictures. But so Dad took pictures of these things. He comes back to the police department. He contacts a member of the Army Corps of Engineers. He takes a member of the Army Corps of Engineers up there. They don't know what these holes are, where they came from, or how they were built. They talk to the local native Indians, are not aware of them being there, which told them that these things had to appear essentially overnight. The Phoenix Gazette, which was the largest, and still is, by the way, the largest newspaper in the state of Arizona and the city of Phoenix, went out and took pictures of my dad kneeling down beside these holes with his hunting rifle. The headline on that story was called Mysterious Mountain Holes, and the bottom line was nobody ever did determine how the holes were made or where they came from, and so finally the Corps of Engineers just dynamited these holes full of rock so that the deer would quit falling into them, drowning. And that seemed to be the end of the story. But then, on November 5, 1975, along the northeastern ridge of that Arizona mountain range, a man by the name of Travis Walton stepped out of his pickup to look at what he called a glowing object. And according to his report, while his crew of loggers were waiting nearby, he approached this UFO, or whatever it was, and was jolted by a blast of inexplicable energy. And his companions were terrified. They took off in the truck, left him there by himself, and Travis says that he was taken on board this alien spacecraft and subjected to a variety of different kinds of physical examinations. Now, his story, Fire in the Sky, was made into a motion picture. And it reports what's considered to be, at least as far as I know, even today, one of the best documented accounts of a UFO abduction ever recorded.
There you go.
I don't know if Travis Walton's story is true. I don't say whether it was or it wasn't, but I do know that I've talked to Stanton Friedman and other people who know Travis personally, and they believe that he's very credible.
Mm-hmm.
They believe the story is also very credible.
Mm.
I also don't know if there was a connection between what happened to Walton and what my dad had discovered in that mountain range not long after. You have to remember about my dad that he had received commendations from the FBI for investigative field work and other things later on down the road. But my dad was connected, to put it in normal terms, he was connected to both sides of the law.
Okay, yeah, I see.
Dad had guys on one side of the law that would feed him information and so on.
Yeah.
But what I know is, Henrik, that right after he made that discovery, my aunt, who lived just a few doors down from us, was petrified one morning. My mother told me this story years later when I was an adult. She wouldn't tell me this when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
But she had walked down to the house, knocked on the door. My mother said she opened the door, and here was my aunt that was just white-faced, and she was talking about this dish-shaped object that she had seen hovering above our home, and it scared her. Now, this was a long time ago. This was long before people were talking about flying saucers and any of that kind of stuff. She didn't make any claim that it was a flying saucer. She didn't know what it was.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
These were not even common terms back then. She just simply described what she saw, and years later, I understood that her description would fit with today what we call something that fits ufology.
Yeah.
But it was almost immediately after that my older sister one night woke my entire family up. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, she is screaming in a way that you never want to hear a human scream. And all of us jumped out of bed, and we ran to her room. She was sitting up in bed. Her eyes were just wide like golf balls. She looked like she was in shock.
Yeah.
I didn't know that as a child, but years later, after I had graduated from 2 years of psychology and some other things, I looked back at it, and I realized that she was in shock.
Yeah, yeah.
And my mother made all of us leave the room. So my dad and both of us boys, we went back to our rooms, and we couldn't sleep. We just sat there all night until the morning. But my mother stayed with her. Well, what I found out years later was that she had woke up in the middle of the night. She could hear whispering in a language that she didn't understand. And something touched her feet and was touching her feet, then touching her legs. And slowly she opened her eyes and was looking in the room, and here are these 3 bulbous-headed, gray-like creatures that were in the room. And there was light coming from the bathroom so that she could see these things. And it petrified her. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to scream. She was too terrified to scream. She was too afraid to scream. And finally, one of these things was looking at her, and it walked up and it laid its hand on her head. And when it did, that's when she screamed out loud, and we all ran in there. And by the time we got in there, whatever was there was gone. And what you have to understand, Henrik, is that I grew up in a very old-fashioned Christian home. This was not something that was part of our. It was not part of our world at all.
Yeah.
It was not something we thought about. For that matter, back then there wasn't really any information like this anyway. But we didn't think about things like apparitions or the paranormal, or we weren't allowed to watch television. We were a very strict family. We weren't allowed to read magazines that might have this bizarre phenomenon in it or whatever.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And yet this phenomenon occurred. It happened, and it was buried in my family. Nobody talked about it. And my sister went to